Hi, I'm John Sumser, and this is the HR Examiner podcast. Today, we're going to be talking with Naomi Lariviere, who's a senior technology and product leader at ADP. Her specialty is the integration of AI ethics, data governance, and responsible product development. She believes in embedding telemetry throughout the experience using AI. At ADP, she plays a central role in shaping how advanced analytics and AI are deployed safely and transparently. You're going to enjoy this one. Okay, Naomi, it's great to have you on here. Um, we've been talking before the show about some of the aspects of the integration of ethics and product management that's your specialty. Um, and we were in particular talking about the importance of having real live, you called it telemetry, baked into the process of working with product development and customers. But tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. When I say we need to have telemetry, one of the things that I think is really important in any product development lifecycle is really understanding, are you making an impact with the software that you're pushing out to your user? So at ADP, not only do we use data to drive the decisions on what we want to build, throughout the entire development lifecycle of a new capability or feature, our teams have been trained to just be religiously following the data and asking questions about why are users doing what they're doing with the solution. So the example that I gave you is one of our very first AI use cases was around a text ID. What we knew is that we spend a lot of time chasing our clients, trying to ensure that they have the right tax information set up so that they can pay the employee and employer taxes correctly and on time so that they avoid penalties and interest, which, that can get very expensive for a client. And simply because, we at the beginning, we didn't have a way to flag that for them, but we knew we could give them an insight. Right. So we started giving our clients this insight. Hey, you have an employee in this jurisdiction, but you don't have a tax ID. Would you like us to help you fix that problem? And on that journey, and what the product team was doing is constantly looking at and looking at the data of like, okay, they keep saying, well, I don't have the employee in that jurisdiction anymore. I want to close that tax ID. We didn't give them a way to do that. So that was an aha moment for us. And if we weren't looking at that data and we weren't looking at, the feedback clients were giving to us, we wouldn't have known what the next right step was. And, while I would love to say that technologists are omniscient, we're not. We need to actually use data to drive the work that we do, and we need to be curious enough and have some good critical thinking to actually apply to what it is that we're doing, so that it informs that we are making that next best decision. Can't do it if you are not looking at the data, and you can't tell that you have the right data unless you're looking at it and you have some way to track it. So, with everything that we do, we look at data. Now, sometimes the data doesn't tell us something, and it's like, well, what are we missing? And being curious enough to actually go in and like, maybe we need another, signal in the ethers so that we can actually, like, are we making the right decision, and did we do the right thing? So I think you have to be introspective enough as a technology organization to make sure that you're thinking about how you handle what you're delivering to your users.
It's awesome. Do you think that most technology organizations have any introspection? That's a big hope.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've worked at lots of different companies, and I think it depends on how sophisticated an organization is, and then also the time that they spend to it. I would say most organizations these days most technology organizations do use data to help inform their decisions. But, I do think, it's really understanding your data, the data quality that you have that is helping you guide where you're going on something, and then really testing for clarity and accuracy in that data that really impacts whether or not you're making the right choice. So my hope is that yes, everybody is using data to inform what they're doing, and that would be the hope. We certainly are at ADP, but I can't speak for everybody.
I've spent a bunch of time on an AI ethics board at ADP, and ADP then, as now, was way ahead of the game compared to other people. Way ahead of the game compared to other people. And I've always assumed that that's a function of scale, that because you're the biggest player in the business, that you have some inherent advantages about being able to see around corners that smaller operations don't have. Do you think that the principles that are being evolved at ADP actually have utility going down market, where people have smaller sample sets and smaller budgets and are more scrappy about aggressively building market share? When you have 700,000 clients, market share becomes an interesting question, right? It's hard to incrementally grow market share, but when you've got 50, you care a whole lot more about market share than you care about ethics, I think. And so, what can you do with that?
So, at ADP, we're privileged to have over 1.1 million clients that trust us with their information, right? And I believe it's maybe more just an operating principle that everybody at ADP works within, which is we protect our clients' data and what they do, and we take it all very, very seriously. And I'm fortunate enough to work with some of the best people in this business in terms of AI and data ethics, and I think it comes back to our core principle of like we are like the keepers of the information for our clients. This is important. This is data that we don't want to compromise. While I think what we do is extremely important to our clients, could other competitors copy kind of our philosophy on stuff? Sure. And I would actually probably recommend to copy our AI and ethics guidelines and principles because they're really good, right? And we're constantly, as much as we're constantly relooking at data and how do we leverage data, we're constantly going, are we doing the right thing? And that is a guiding principle and question in anything that we're building and developing. Are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the right thing for that employee, for that HR practitioner, for the managers who are having to make decisions on people and process and career growth for their associates? So while I'd love to say it's simply because of our scale, I think it's more simply because of our beliefs and what we think is right for our clients.
That's interesting. So I want to tackle something that is a little hard to articulate, and that is, it seems to me that there are at least 3 problem areas in doing the kind of work you're doing with AI. First problem area is, like is the case in a lot of HR, there are right answers and wrong answers to questions, particularly when you get down to payroll. There are right answers and wrong answers to questions, and it is challenging to deliver an answer all the way through the system that you can guarantee is correct. So that's the first. The second is, when you wrap those answers in a large language model description, you introduce another layer of accuracy risk into the equation. And so I'd be interested in what you think about that. But this all leads up to the third category, which is places where there isn't really hard data involved, like, say, a performance review or some guidance that you want to give a manager. And that's where I think you probably know Mira Murati. and thinking machines, and the experiment they did recently, which is they asked the same question 1,000 times and got 80 different categories of answer. And so that seems like a pretty big muddle if you're trying to deliver useful strategic information that's rooted in sort of sketchy data. So that's, to me, that's the sort of portfolio of error questions. How do you tackle error there?
Okay, maybe let's break it down. Let's talk about data quality first, right?
Okay, that's great.
Let's start there, because in any decision or any question that you're trying to solve, data quality determines whether AI is going to deliver an insight or if it's going to amplify noise, right? To your point around, there's either a right answer or a wrong answer. And that can honestly be, if you're just looking at data to infer yes or no, then that can be a challenge. What we tend to layer on here at ADP is then confirming with users whether or not we're looking at the problem correctly. So every time we decide to build, we have an idea about something that might help our users. Yes, we start with data and we go, does the data tell us one way or another a direction, right? And we will confirm whether or not we're on the right path with actually what we would say is probably a large basis of users to help us go, yes, we're directionally in the right place or not, right? But, good data can't just be clean data. It also needs to be accurate or contextually accurate in the way that you're using it. So when we're looking at data, we're looking for completeness, we're looking for consistency, and we're looking at the relevance to the human decision that AI would be informing. So in your payroll example, if we were talking about payroll errors, we want to be looking at is the data there? Is it clean? Is it accurate? Is it complete? Is it consistently the same across what we're seeing? And can we make an inference that would give a human, or are we seeing actions in the system that help AI or help the human make a decision that AI could maybe speed up or make more efficient for the user? So we spend a ton of time in our systems focusing our effort upstream, defining what's fit for purpose, and how we would want to use data before we ever would even go to an LLM to actually make that next decision on should we use the LLM for this, and then which LLM would we use, which version, and all that stuff. Now, there are instances where there's missing data. Now, missing data is a signal. It's not a flaw. It tells us that there may be some process or understanding of the system or where you're collecting the data that might be broken. So that, for us, that gives us moments of pause and go, we're not thinking about this correctly. And maybe we shouldn't be thinking about AI in this instance, because we don't ever want AI to fill in the gaps, right? It shouldn't be filling in the gaps. It should have a very clear recipe in terms of what it's doing, why it's doing it, and how it should act when we want it to. And that's kind of the steering guardrails that we would put around it. And especially in HR, because data represents people. And you really have to think, and especially with this AI, and many organizations are using this, kind of current tool bag of AI for transformation journeys. You have to be able to preserve the intent of the data and the meaning and understanding of it in the context that you're using it for, right? Let's start. That's my starting foray, is we really have to be thinking about data quality and what.
Awesome. So you get data quality right, and we could do an hour on data quality. That's such a wonderful topic. But let's say you get data quality right. Now you have to take, if you're using some variant of AI to deliver an answer for a client, you have to take that data and move it through transformative processes and keep it intact as you move it through transformative processes. And so that's kind of the next question is how do you do that? How do you ensure that the data that you know is right over here ends up right in the hands of the client?
Yeah. So we've talked about this before, John, around how, we're at ADP, we're being really thoughtful about the use cases that we're using AI for. And especially, we've talked a little bit about payroll processing and where we think we can leverage AI. Just because you can with AI doesn't mean you should with AI, especially in the context of HR. You mentioned performance reviews. You have to be really thoughtful about like what is the impact of infusing AI into a process if it really doesn't need to be. But what I would say in terms of when we think about LLMs, and you had said, like you could wrap the answers could be wrapped into an LLM. It's transforming the data. What we really think about, there's two types of paths that you can currently go down with this technology: a probabilistic path or deterministic path. So a probabilistic path is like, well, 80% of the time the data would be telling you X, so here's the answer to it in this way. And then a deterministic path, which is very, think about, like if and then path. So like if this, then that. I think a lot of the technology and what a lot of organizations are doing is following into the latter pattern, which is, what maybe the best way to is rules-based approaches around, here's the data. If it fits in this parameter, I need you to go, and the answer is going to be this answer, and it's always going to be that answer. I think that's what you're starting or that's what a lot of organizations from a safety and security perspective are thinking about, and that's what they're delivering. I think the other path, I don't think anybody has a great answer for yet. The probability that, is 80% accurate enough for you? I don't know, right? And so I think, like, at least how we're approaching it right now is that's not a path what we're heading down at the moment, because for us, with all the data that we protect and how we look at it, we want to make sure that we're giving our clients the best right answer based off the information that we know. And obviously, we've curated that data with our clients as we've gone along. But we want to give them the things that have the best impact, but they're the most feasible to apply this to. So, and then ultimately, we want to give them the decision on whether or not they take the action or not take the action. So, and that's also based on the fact that our clients have told us, we don't want you to do it all for us. We always want to be in the loop of this decision. Today, in some of these processes, they're doing it based off what they know in their head. As we look for ways to kind of make that process more efficient for them, they still want to be able to get to the right answer. So providing them with the transparency of like how we got to the answer, what we used, what the math was to get to that answer, and then letting them decide. Those are all things that are super important to us as we think about how we roll out AI. And maybe just to add one more point is, you and I have talked about how a lot of use cases fail, right? What we think about here, and as we're on this journey, because all organizations are learning together, this is kind of like this interesting time in our careers and in the history of work, that we're all learning the same things all at the same time. And a lot of organizations are building the plane as they're flying the plane, right? We believe that this is a trust building exercise. We don't, while we know this technology at one day and one point in time will be able to do the entire process by itself, what we believe is as we step through it and take an intentional approach to it, that we will see our users become more confident in the technology. It gives them the right parameters. We've given them the guardrails on everything that the technology is doing, and we build that trust. So maybe one day in the future, you can have a fully autonomous system, but that's in the future, right? Right now, it's all about everybody's getting comfortable and we all are understanding the fact pattern as we go along and develop it.
That's interesting. So you make me wonder if ADP or anybody has built the module that is the first thing you hit after the interface that decides whether a rules-based answer or a generative answer is the right thing. So you'd imagine just on the other side of the prompt box, there is this air traffic controller who routes the logic problems over here and the non-logic problems over there. Is that a thing?
Yeah, actually, it is a thing. Some of the big LLM companies, they actually call them control towers or control orchestrators, right? So there is this concept within this technology where we use a control tower on our side of the fence, which actually tells us, the technology. It tells us everything about the technology. It gives us all the telemetry in terms of observability, evaluation frameworks, all of that. So we can tell it whether or not it's doing the right thing. When the technology actually ends up in a user's hands, take a job description. We can generate a job description for you based off of all of the job descriptions that go through our system in a year, right? So if you're looking for a software engineer, we can say with reasonable accuracy that these are all for a job description, a basic job description, here's all the required skill sets that you would need. But what we do is we don't ask our clients to just blindly accept that. They have an opportunity to review it and add or modify or edit the response. And that information then goes back into our technology so that we're continuously going oh, Naomi changed the job description to add in, these critical areas that she thought was important for this particular job. So that gets fed back into it. But the client still has the decision on, do I use this? Do I not use this? Do I want to modify it? They have all of that opportunity. So I think, yes, when you're thinking about the client and how they experience it, they always have the opportunity to say yay or nay or modify what the response is.
Awesome.
But it's a little different on our side.
Yeah, in the last category, which is not hard data but speculative data, the performance review or career pathing advice, those sorts of things. How do you think about accuracy there, where accuracy is so situational that generic answers fail?
Yeah, I'd say, one of the things that we think about is impact and feasibility when we think about how we apply AI use cases, right? And as I mentioned to you, we have a 1.1 million clients. We have an obligation to them to make sure that what we do and how we approach a problem is the way that they would want to experience the problem. But even the end user, which is, Naomi getting a performance review, how would they experience it, right? So when it comes to things like performance reviews, we're being super intentional around whether or not we will allow AI in that space. I think this, I talk about careful curation of use cases all the time. Performance or anything that impacts your pay or your ability to grow or move in an organization should not be entered into lightly. They should be something that is carefully reviewed to ensure that you are maintaining an accurate and unbiased opinion and that the technology can do that for you. At the moment, I know that there are organizations that have implemented this type of technology. We have not, because we're being very thoughtful about what is the right approach to apply to it, and where is the right place to insert this technology into that process. Because you're right, this technology isn't perfect, and in some instances, you do need it to be perfect. And so in those instances where you do need it to be perfect, if the technology doesn't fit or pass the test, you shouldn't be using it, right?
That's interesting because if you shouldn't be using it, which I think you're right, how do you ever make enough mistakes to be able to use it?
Yeah, we all learn through failure, right? And experimentation. And, that's when those types of projects are kept in that experimenting mode. Like, learning, observing, iterating, feeding back are all part of this process. So, while I say right now, maybe the technology isn't the best technology, it doesn't mean that it won't get better or we maybe learn to look at the problem a little bit differently. Um, but that comes through experimentation, right? And I think organizations will get there. But until, I mean, you talk about things like performance reviews or hiring decisions. There's so much going on in the world of regulation that should, um, and I know it does for us. Like there's so much change and that everything is going through right now in that space that while we might find this area is interesting, maybe we don't want to do anything right now because we want to see how this game plays out a little bit and before we make a choice on pursuing it or not.
So I'm going to use that one. Let's do the next thing, which is 5 years ago, this conversation would have been all about bias. And we haven't talked about bias at all yet in this conversation. And in those days, a prevailing way of thinking about the problem was bias came from having limited experience on the design team. That the ultimate source of bias in an AI project was the limits of the design team to be able to understand the problem from an entire array of perspectives rather than just the perspectives of the people building the code. How do you think about bias today? How do you think about it today?
I'd say the bias is still there in the decision-making process of whether or not you pursue a particular thing, right? I do believe that as, for this particular, like 5 years ago, generative AI, LMs, they weren't a thing, right? Like they were still in the halls of academia, right? And really it was, like, did your rules-based engine do the right thing, right? And did you think about it? I think most organizations have now, they are continue to solve for the point that you made around teams being more diverse. But I think there's a lot more scrutiny on the data that we use, and is the data fair and balanced, right? So I think testing your data, testing your hypothesis, auditing against that, and having bias tests done by independent third parties, which is one of the things that we do here. Those are all good guardrails, and it's the way that we just think about AI and deploy it responsibly. You can't, just because we don't maybe talk about it as heavily, it doesn't mean that we aren't still doing it, that we are testing for it, and that we're trying to avoid inaccuracies or an unfair, unintended consequence of what it is that we're doing. But I also would say, like, we're also super picky about, I just mentioned we were talking about performance. Like, we're super picky about it in other parts of the life cycle of an employee and where we will deploy AI, because, to your point, you can have an unintentional consequence. So we try to limit our exposure in those types of areas.
It's awesome. I'm going to have a last question. You said something a little bit ago that caught my attention. You talked about learning how to see the problem differently. And that's such an interesting thing. The innovator's dilemma is all about the fact that it's really hard to learn how to see the problem differently. And it strikes me as being particularly human to not be able to change your mind about what a problem is. And that seems to me to be one of the limits on what we can do with this technology right now, is that people think they understand the problem, but if you look at it in a slightly different way, it doesn't look like the problem that you're trying to solve at all. So how do you think we're going to get better at rethinking what the problem is that we're solving?
That's a great question. And I don't know that I have a great answer to it. I actually was just challenging a team this morning around, you think you're going to solve the problem, but you have all these constraints in it. What it happens in a world where there are no constraints, where you could do anything that you wanted to in the world, and you could just visibly see on people's faces that they were uncomfortable with that idea because they were comfortable in a world of constraints, right? And to your point, that is the innovator's dilemma, is like, how do you think differently? How do you do something differently? And I think that's something that as technologists, as business people, we all need to maybe coach ourselves a little bit to, like, how would we do this differently? If I didn't have all these, mitigating factors, how would I do this differently? And honestly, it's one of those games of, like, you just have to try and experiment and then take whatever your idea is and test it with people and go, like, am I in the right direction or the right zone, or am I completely off the train tracks on this one? But if you're not doing it, and you're just going, like, my idea is perfect and it's always going to work out and all of that, then maybe I would kind of question somebody when they think about it that way. So you can't ever get over learning, asking questions, and being curious. And that's actually one of the things that this technology isn't good for. It's not good for being curious. That's a human element, and that's what we need to bring to the table, is that curiosity, those uniquely human critical thinking skills and creativity to bring to problem solving. And I don't think that is ever going to go away.
What a great answer. What a great way to wrap up the conversation. ADP is awfully lucky to have you doing the job that you're doing. There are plenty of people. Let me assure you, there are plenty of people who are not as thoughtful about this as you are, running departments like yours. Any last thoughts before we call it a day?
No, I mean, I think I've left it all on the table, but if you ever need me to come and opine about any of this stuff, I'm happy to do so.
No, I think we opened the door to a bunch of interesting next level conversations, and I will be back to bother you about that.
Okay.
So thanks, Naomi. It was great to have you here, and we will talk to you soon.